You're listening to the No Bullshit Vegan Podcast, episode 219. Plant-based athletes Leanna Carriere and Dr. Timm Döbert join me to discuss their upcoming 30,000-kilometer cycling journey from Alaska to Chile, following migratory birds and raising awareness about biodiversity and climate.
Welcome to the No Bullshit Vegan Podcast. Myth-busting and evidence-based advice to help you kick butt with your health and fitness on a vegan diet. Here's your host, Karina Inkster.
Hey, welcome to the show. I'm Karina, your go-to no BS vegan fitness and nutrition coach. Thanks for tuning in. If you're ready to get stronger, build muscle, and fuel your body on plants, check out our coaching programs at karinainkster.com/coaching. Luckily for you, you don't have to cycle across continents to get results. So that's karinainkster.com/coaching. My guests today are Leanna Carriere and Dr. Timm Döbert. Leanna is a seasoned personal trainer with over 15 years of experience and the co-founder of 7 Summit Snacks, a brand born from adventure and fueled by endurance. A former international track and field athlete for Team Canada, Leanna has channeled her competitive spirit into helping others achieve their potential in sport and life. As the co-founder of Wings of Survival, she leads an inspiring movement that connects endurance challenges with purpose, advocating for a healthy planet and healthy humans. Through this initiative, Leanna uses her athletic pursuits to raise awareness about the strong link between environmental and human health, championing a healthier, more equitable future for all. A Women of Vision Award recipient, Leanna continues to be a powerful voice for women's health, girls in sport, and the vital connection between human performance and planetary well-being. Timm is a scientist, explorer, and athlete. He's a Canada Chapter Explorers Club member, a Royal Canadian Geographical Society Fellow, and a Scientific Exploration Society Fellow. En route to a PhD in global change ecology, he spent over a decade in the Asia-Pacific region, conducting research in alpine meadows in New Zealand, tropical dry forests in Thailand, tropical rainforests in Malaysia, temperate forests in Australia, and tropical savannas in India, underpinned by a drive to safeguard wild spaces and wildlife. As a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Alberta, he investigated land use effects on grassland biodiversity, carbon dynamics, and ecosystem processes. Here's our conversation. Timm and Leanna, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So let me just tell our listeners how I came across you two. Our mutual friend, colleague, awesome vegan person, Francis, was introduced to me actually by Zoe, who's a coach on my team with our clients. And so Francis is doing this amazing documentary project on vegan athletes across Canada. I think he did a whole bunch in Alberta. He did a whole bunch across BC. And so Zoe connected me with Francis to do this documentary project. I'm not sure when it'll come out, but we did open water swimming. We did a bunch of strength training. So I'm looking forward to being part of that. And when we were finished doing this filming project, Francis said, "Oh, I have these 2 people who absolutely have to be on your podcast. They're like powerhouse vegan athletes." And that was you guys. So thank you to both Zoe and Francis for connecting us. It's kind of funny how that vegan world, connection kind of works. So Timm is joining us from Germany, and Leanna, you're in Edmonton. Is that right?
Yeah, correct.
So we're doing like a cross Canada / cross continent interview today, which is awesome. So Leanna, let me start by asking you what your vegan story is. And does it have anything to do with Timm, or is it your own?
Well, it does have a lot to do with Timm. Through my athletic career, I was an international pole vaulter for Canada. My training partner at the time was vegan. So that's when I was kind of first introduced to her own vegan lifestyle. And a lot of times we'd go and compete and she'd search out these amazing restaurants. And so I found I was eating a lot vegan with her, and still just being a speed power athlete, been a personal trainer for a long time. There was a lot, and this is 10 years ago or so, a lot of emphasis on kind of paleo type diets and different trends. And so kind of dabbling in different things, what I felt made my performance better as an athlete. And then shortly, I think in 2000, when did we meet Timm? 2022-ish, 2021. I kind of was on this like half vegan half the time, and then maybe I'd throw in some meat here and there. But I met Timm, and on his 40th birthday, he's like, I want to be completely vegan. So I made him this vegan dinner. Found this really nice chocolate cake, and it started kind of go from there to be like fully vegetarian. And then each year kind of got more vegan. But the biggest message from my end was that when Timm, and he can introduce himself, having his PhD in climate change ecology, said that one of the best things we can do for this planet is be plant-based. And I kind of thought, I said, well, that's great because I feel great eating plants. And then obviously the whole animal welfare as well. I have a problem just even killing a mosquito the best of times. So really reconnecting with that part of myself and understanding the impact I have on the environment as an individual, and him providing me that knowledge that as an individual, I can still make a big difference in what I'm eating. And especially here in Canada, it's super easy to be vegan and make what I believe are the right choices.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I went vegan 23 years ago, and even then it was way easier in Vancouver specifically, and Canada more generally, than other places in the world. Mind you, it wasn't what it was like now. It was quite different. So Timm, what was your motivation then? I mean, I'm assuming it had something to do with the environmental impact, climate change, your research, that kind of thing.
Yeah, good question. I don't know what came first. I feel there's so many really good reasons for being vegan. On the contrary, there's perhaps no reason not to be vegan. I don't know how it started, but as Leanna said, I've spent a lot of time as a tropical ecologist living in rainforests in Southeast Asia in particular, and you do see the impacts of deforestation, and you're just connecting the dots, right? Just how animal agriculture or how our food system is just absolutely tied to all the kind of impacts we're having on the planet, and in terms of land use change and pollution. And it all kind of comes together very easily when you start thinking about all the mechanism and processes. So I don't know how it started, but again, I think there's so many good reasons. And if nothing else, you have arguments, you talk to people, you can have scientific discussions, but I feel if nothing else, it's always an ethical choice that, we as the big brain species should take. So I'm a strong believer in this idea of shifting from domination of the planet to stewardship, which in a lot of ways is a 180-degree mind shift, just the way we run societies. And don't have to go into detail, but obviously that infiltrates the whole capitalistic system and lots of things. It's all connected. But I think it's that mind shift which is absolutely fundamental, and that's really what we focus on as athletes, and this Wings of Survival initiative that we're running, different expeditions. And it's fundamentally this idea of how do we get more people to truly care and really to understand our place as humans in this big web of life. Essentially, we're not ruling the world, but we should be that species that is taking care of all the other species because we can. So
absolutely. And I want to talk about this amazing project and various expeditions you two have done. There's one thing on my brain right now, though, just because I was in a Reddit debate last night with, the usual vegan bullshit, right? And in this case, by the way, just as a background here, I'm doing this entirely for my own amusement. I don't let it get to me. People insult vegans all the time. Someone yesterday on Reddit said that his wife had better biceps than mine. And I'm like, oh, so she also does chin-ups with 50 pounds attached to her waist, because that's what I do. Anyway, the point is, it was this debate, and I use air quotes because it never really is a legitimate debate, with a hunter in the States. And so, of course, you have all these arguments about how hunting is sustainable. And this dude's argument was that hunters are responsible for much more conservation than any vegan ever will be. And his reference was to a US government website that said, in 91 years, through taxes and various initiatives, hunters have saved something like 6 million acres of wetlands. So I did some quick math to see how many vegans there were in the States. And it turns out every year, 16 million acres of land are saved just by eating a plant-based diet by those people who are already vegan. So there's like a math problem here. But my point is, I think a lot of people these days are focusing on, hunting, family farms, small scale agriculture. They kind of all understand that commercial animal agriculture is horrendous for the environment. But with your background and your research, what are kind of like the top one or two explanations that you have for folks where animal products are inherently not good for our environment? And in the research that I've done, which is not PhD level, of course, I've seen that in a lot of cases, local food is worse for the environment if it's animal-based local food versus importing plant-based food. So what are your thoughts on smaller scale agriculture, hunting, these things that people think are sustainable, but if you look at the research, actually aren't?
It's probably towards me, yeah. I'd say because you're talking about numbers, I think without knowing the numbers exactly, we're just running out of space. Even if, say, organic agriculture and small-scale subsistence farming was kind of happening or advocated all across the globe, it's just a finite amount of land we have. So we'd absolutely run out of space. And I think George Monbiot in his book on regeneration, he's done all the math behind it. I don't know the numbers, but fact is we're just way too many people to be able to do this. So maybe hundreds, thousands of years ago that would have worked, just fewer people. We don't have the luxury, so we do have to look at striking a very healthy balance between keeping places wild, keeping places natural, versus how do we generate food. And we know that most of the food that is being produced goes to animals. And that's not just the food that is grown in the tropics, in the Amazon, the soy, but it's a lot of food in the places in the US and Canada where we come from. So we could basically take a shortcut just by going after the plants directly. And the numbers are outrageous in terms of land that we could potentially set aside for rewilding and this whole other aspect of regenerating the planet, and that's got all these snowball benefits of drawing CO2 into the ground, into the vegetation. Biodiversity decline is so massive, but so there's all these positive trickle down effects. So as a basic stat, we just don't have the space basically to go down that route. I mean, there's obviously ways for organic farming to be very healthy for the environment, just in general, not about animal agriculture, but sort of subsistence farming. But yeah, we just can't do it at scale. We're just way too many people.
That makes sense. You mentioned George Monbiot's book, Regenesis, which I read recently-ish. Highly recommended to folks who are listening. Regenesis, Feeding the World Without Devouring the Planet. One of the stats from that book that stood out to me was you'd have to ship a kilo of peas, like dried peas, 100 times around the world for it to match the greenhouse gas emissions of 1 kilo of local beef. So the type of food matters way more than how many miles it traveled to get to you. And I think that's part of why we need to think about plant-based foods. So Leanna, I want to talk to you about your project with Timm, this absolutely insane and inspiring athletic endeavor, Wings of Survival. What is the deal?
Which originally in my mind started off as a super simple project, has elaborated into this massive project. Prior to meeting Timm, I had this idea to cycle the Pan American Highway, and little did I know at the same time he was looking at the same route because it was the flyway of the migratory birds, and he wanted to do something with his athletics and his science background, and I wanted to do something purposeful with my athletics. When we met up and I kind of said, do you want to ride 30,000 kilometers with me? He said, yes.
So told you it was insane.
I know. Not often do you find someone that's like, yes, I'll ride 30,000 kilometers. But there was a but. We have to do something more purposeful. So you really challenged the thinking on just going out and doing a record attempt or just, accomplishing an athletic feat, but really bringing this education and this science and sport together to do with our shared passion and talents to really create a movement and really to get people to think and reconnect with nature and how we're impacting it. So birds are one of the best indicators of the health of the planet. And so I really love that. So we're going to be following the whimbrel as well as some other migratory birds, but across the Pacific Flyway, so along the west coast from Alaska all the way down to the southern tip of Chile. So on bikes. So we'll be doing this on bikes, and we hope to engage as well virtual audiences and doing community outreach along the Flyway. So it's turned into quite a large project that we're super excited. We'll be leaving June next year.
And how long does that take?
So the goal is to get there in 9 months to reconnect with the same flock of birds that we meet in Alaska. So that's an ongoing study where they put little GPSs on these birds. And this species of bird has been known to fly all the way down to the southern tip of South America. We were lucky enough, Tim snapped a photo of it when we were in Patagonia 4 years ago. We didn't even realize at the time. But he was looking through his photos the other day. He's like, it's a whimbrel. So it's kind of neat to see how all these little birds travel. They're the best endurance athletes. They dwarf us as humans, just what they're capable of doing. So the goal is to reconnect with them before they start flying back.
That is super cool. And so, Tim, how does it work in terms of outreach or fundraising? Like, what are the logistics around this project? Like, I assume there's sponsorship options. Like, how does that kind of work with this project?
Yeah, it's grown into this big initiative. So it started about 4 years ago. And we do have this kind of broad network of different partners. So there's exploration societies, both in Europe and in North America. There's different organizations now which are evolving at the sports and nature interface. So it's a fairly new concept to use sports as a mechanism to attract people towards sustainability is usually the hook. For us, it's more say nature or biodiversity, but it's usually around sustainability. So that's a big component. There's different brands, still lots of open slots for brands to join us if of interest. So I don't know if that, I just want to emphasize with cycling, because bike is always the challenge. I don't know if we said cycling already, but because there's been people kind of biking on motorbikes, so it's actually cycling.
I see.
Just to make sure. I don't know if we said that.
Human-powered.
Bike is always funny. Human-powered, yeah. So it's cycling and pack rafting, because we have to cross the Darien Gap and there's no road. And at the moment, the idea is to kind of raft around the Caribbean side. So there's those brands. We work with scientists. So we do work with scientists who study us as human athletes. We help pioneer scientific research that is interesting and sort of groundbreaking in itself, but we're also trying to create interesting content for comparing the birds. So in a way, pitching the birds as the greatest endurance athletes on the planet, because what they do is so much more amazing than what we are capable of as humans. So we're trying to build those bridges, very organic storytelling bridges from us as humans to the birds. And that's where the science plays a big role. So we work with nutrition scientists, people who study physiology, psychology. So kind of that whole interconnected space that affects our performance and resilience as we cross the Americas. That's a big component. Then we work with bird scientists. So as Leanna said, we'll have probably 5 birds which are going to carry those little GPS devices. And it's part of an ongoing research. To some people, it might not sound so nice, but it's literally the only way. It's literally the only way we can understand where do those birds go and what places do we have to urgently protect. It's the only way to study animals. So it's basically a way to understand the migration routes, the places the birds stop along their route. It's just such an enormous scale, the entire America. So without the science, we're basically left in the dark and we don't know where those birds go. So, and it's got ethics approval and it's all very, very carefully done. So just to reassure anyone who's maybe concerned. And again, we're taking advantage of an ongoing project. So that's been running for a couple of years. So we work with an NGO called Manomed. So we're basically just observing and filming and kind of meeting those birds, but we are not actively tagging. So we're not experienced and not qualified to do this. It's our partner organizations who take care. So we do have different NGO partners like Birds Canada and Manomed and Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network. So we've been really focusing on building partnerships, on bringing different organizations on board so that we just go as basically catalysts for a story. It's not about Leanna and I, but it's about we're just utilizing our skills and the talents we have and the passions we have to really leverage fantastic projects across the flyway that are happening. But we're basically coming with a story of connectedness for people to understand how across the flyway different habitats are connected and local efforts play a big role in preserving species. And people are not alone. So people might sometimes feel alone. Conservation can be a lonely place because conserving is so much more difficult than destroying for development, so to speak. But it's for people to understand we're not alone. We're connected across the flyway. And so there's different partners, NGOs, academia, brands, exploration. And yeah, we're very much still exploring ways to team up with different brands, organizations. So anyone interested in the story, we're very, very happy to talk.
Amazing. Well, before we hit record, Leanna and I were talking about some of those specific brands that are partnering with you guys. Leanna, can you tell me a little bit about that? One of them actually is a brand that I've happened to mention on the podcast a bunch of times before because of their fava bean tofu, and they're local to me. So tell us a little bit about some of those.
Guess who it is?
Guess who?
Young Foods. Yeah, they came on board I think a couple of years ago. So Tim and I rode across Canada and we did a study. We actually had a study done because we're plant-based athletes. So we cycled 150 kilometers a day for 30 days straight. So it was really great to test some of the science. And we have a paper that's going to be published soon. It's been accepted into a journal. So that's really exciting because it backs up what we eat is fueling our body to what it needs. The biggest thing when you're cycling and doing endurance sports, at least I get asked as a coach all the time, it's like, where do you get your protein from? How do you stay healthy? And what was great about this was that we didn't lose any lean mass while we were cycling. Well, we lost some, but not as much as you might think. We didn't get sick. We weren't overtrained. We stayed, like, our metabolic rate increased as it should, and our baselines returned back to normal after 2 or 3 days. So it was really exciting to be a part of that study. And Big Mountain Foods came on board and provide us some fuel on the go. So cooking Big Mountain Foods while we were camping was a tasty treat for sure. We enjoyed that. We cycled in the grasslands this year, another Vancouver-based company. We had V-Gain sponsor us again for protein. That's always, I'm sure, a hot topic you've come across. I do all the time about animal versus, rice or pea protein. But rice and pea protein is just so good and it's easy to digest and it's just as good, if not better. It is better. Absolutely. But there's lots to say. So I'm always faced with this in just my line of work with what do you eat and how do you keep your muscle on? And Tim and I both proved this in the study we did that you can eat plant-based, be super healthy and do something as crazy as cycle 150 kilometers a day for 30 days. So that was great.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah. So we love to experiment with different kind of vegan food. Like the Gusta one is great as well. We like our Canadian products for sure. And then of course, Seven Summits, I co-founded a chocolate company with my sister about 5 years ago. And so we're pretty exciting. We do have a milk chocolate, but we have a vegan, all our dark chocolate is vegan. And then we're coming out with energy protein cluster. And I just got a sample a couple days ago with the protein we're using. We tried pea and rice protein. So that's going to be all vegan, kind of like a trail mix cluster. So we're super excited to launch that product. Yeah, so it's neat being in the food sector and then with Wings of Survival and then in the personal training sector. But there's always a good reason to eat plant-based.
Well, my question is, what don't you do at this point?
I'm a mom.
My sister is a climber and she always calls those little cluster things moose poo. So she's got dark chocolate and like all sorts of high calorie dried fruit and nuts and all that. Yeah, they call it moose poo. It's applicable. It works. What kind of calorie intake are you on if you're cycling 150K a day?
I think Tim broke some records. Tim consumes, I think Tim had the highest resting metabolic rate ever recorded in a study.
No way.
Yeah. So that means his body burns more calories just sitting there than your average individual. I'm just an average. I'm average. But so for Timm on a day like that, and I mean, it's hard to get up to 10,000 calories. Like the only studies when you think about, well, Michael Phelps was taking in, I think I have to look at that again, but he had a ridiculous caloric intake as well. But Timm, I think were you just over 10,000, around 10,000 calories?
Yeah, sounds about right. I just know the scientists said they had to recalculate the number a couple of times because it just seemed so outrageously high. But of course, not every human being has been studied, but in terms of what they could find in the literature, it was just very, very high. Yeah.
That's amazing. I thought 3,000 was high. Back when I worked with clients in a gym, 3,000 calories, even that was like stuffing my face at all times. So I can't imagine more than tripling that.
Yeah, Timm is 10 and I think I'm around 5. I'm usually half of what at home. Timm has a Timm size bowl and then my size bowl. So
a Timm size bowl. Yeah, that sounds about right. About right. Cool. So on the subject of being plant-based athletes, I know that's a big part of this whole initiative is like, even in 2025, I kind of feel like vegan athletes still have something to prove. Right? There's a lot of misinformation out there. As you said, Leanna, there's a lot of questioning still about, well, what do you eat? And what about protein? And I don't know why there's still this huge amount of myths out there. But what sorts of things do you guys come across? Like, do people ask you, oh, well, what kind of supplements do you take? Or do they question being plant-based? Like, what kind of response do you get generally to the plant-based part and the athlete part?
Because I'm in the gym with people every day. And if I have a new client, we're always going over health and nutrition. And then I always like to just casually slide it in. And then they look at me. They kind of give me a second. Oh, nice. And then
covert vegan activism.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I had the other day, someone came up to me and they're like, well, you don't look vegan.
Oh, so vegans have a look apparently,
huh? What does that even mean? He's like, well, you have some like muscle on you. I was like, yes. It's a completely healthy way to eat. You can get all the food and nutrients you need in a plant-based diet. And I find there's similar conversations that come up, at least for myself in the gym. People get curious though. And I love when people ask, they're like, oh, well, what are you making for dinner? Or what's your, how do you get your protein? And then I can, give them a sample of something to try, whether it's the vegan or, I'll say go get the Big Mountain Foods or try True Bar instead of a normal protein bar. So a lot is just like curiosity. I find a lot of people are curious now that I talk to, but I don't know where. There's obviously the fear of making that plunge. There was a psychology study done and people preferred the term plant-based versus vegan. Mm-hmm. So that was a huge thing of how you address it with people. So it's interesting. I find it interesting just to talk to people and randomly say, I'm vegan, and they look at me. A lot of times I think they think we're just eating raw fruits and vegetables.
And air, probably.
Yeah. And they're surprised by the way we look or perform because, well, we're healthy. We have good lean mass on. We're able to do these incredible athletic feats. My strength, I think Timm as well, like the strength in the gym's not at a deficit. Like it's very comparable, if not better. So it's been interesting. I don't know, Timm, if you have something to add on that.
Yeah, I'm just glad we have a scientific paper now because you might feel the same, but or maybe you have more energy than I do, but I get so tired of these conversations. It's a tough one, and it always goes in the same direction. So I'm very, very excited about this paper that is, as Leanna said, coming out very soon. So it's been accepted. So it's really such a valuable reference for us to really cite our own data, which has been collected on ourselves, basically. So that's very powerful for us. And as I said earlier, I feel. And being a conservation scientist, I don't have a lot of patience because I understand what's happening to the planet. I deal with planetary science on a daily basis. I feel my scale is much bigger than the individual. That's why I like Wings of Survival, but because it's really in a lot of ways it's a storytelling endeavor, and it's planting the seeds for people to hopefully make the right decisions, come to the right conclusions themselves without having those constant one-to-one discussions. And I'm not saying they're not important, they're absolutely important, but I like working at a bigger scale and telling stories, and hopefully for people to understand or to see, basically to witness, to see what's possible. And we're not, we're just doing this organically. We're not going to, for 9 months, we're not constantly going to be standing there saying you have to eat, you have to be vegan, you have to be plant-based. That's not how we're going to go about this, but it's more this storytelling component, because I think that's what resonates most with people, because there's so much ego in these things, and it's absolutely hard to deal with this, all these perceptions people have, and as I said, this kind of ego around all these things. And I think the storytelling approach, where you basically invite people to follow this journey, and then you very organically tie the diet and what we eat into the story. And I hope that's sort of going to open up people's minds and give people an opportunity to think about their own choices without feeling maybe cornered a little bit and sort of having to defend their choices. So I don't know, but maybe it's complementary. I think it needs a lot of different approaches, but that's the one I hope. Yeah, that's the one I believe is the best one for us at this point.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just had a conversation this morning with a friend about this, like you mentioned ego. So it reminded me of this idea that I think a lot of times people inherently know that there's something to eating plant-based, vegan, whatever you want to call it. I think at this point, it's pretty difficult, unless you're a climate change denier, which is a whole other story. It's difficult to argue in favor of eating animal products. It's pretty basic, but people grew up with it. People like eating meat, etc. And so I think this ego thing a lot of times is just defensiveness or cognitive dissonance, right? And then they start attacking the messenger instead of rethinking their own beliefs. And so what you're saying about ego and having different approaches, I think makes sense, because we as vegan people, we're all in the same virtual room right now, essentially preaching to the choir, because our listeners are also somewhere on the vegan spectrum, right? But in the greater world, I think it is important to have various different ways that we present veganism, right? So for you guys, insane athletic feats, and then just shoving in the fact that you're plant-based athletes, right? That piques people's interest. In my case, a lot of time it's the same, because I'm also a coach, I think for around the same time as Leanna. It's been 15 years. But also having cookbooks all about amazing food and, like shepherd's pie and chocolate cake. Oh, by the way, it's plant-based, right? So there's all these different ways of expanding that sphere. So I'm interested in what you two think or hope for, let's say, the next 5 to 10 years. I've heard some concerning stats that meat intake globally is increasing, not decreasing. So what are some things in the next half to 1 decade that you would like to see change, or that you would like to have happen? I'll start with you, Leanna.
Yeah, well, it'd be great to see everyone plant-based. The food conferences I've been going to each year have been more highlighting plant-based foods, vegan foods. It has grown substantially over the last 3 years. Vancouver holds a huge one, CFHA, and it's a huge conference. It's like the national championships for food. And I've really seen just this massive growth on vegan food. I know companies like Big Mountain Foods, they're really pushing hard to get the cost down so that eating vegan isn't a cost choice anymore. I know that's a big component of it. So seeing those costs come down to make it, and then I don't want to say that to make it affordable, because I think that's just a fear. You can eat vegan pretty cheap, beans, lentils. It is easy, but that's one fear. And I know when I've talked to other food companies, that's a struggle. They're trying to drive those costs down. Sort of policy change would be great. Like you said, we're in our own little kind of ecosystem here where we're kind of talking to the same group. But 7 Summits, we recently did a survey on these clusters that we wanted to do. And one of the questions were, how important is it? And we had about 200 people do the survey. How important is it to you that this product is plant-based? And the percent was like 2%. It was so low.
Oh, really? Okay.
And that was, it's really hard for me.
That's surprising.
For me to see as an outdoor 1% for the planet company that even are kind of the people that are aware of our brand and wanted to participate in this study that ranked that low, but we're still going to use plant-based protein. So I'm okay with that. So I found that really surprising, and we just got that out. So it's this like, I want to start to see people's minds change, but I think people need to be exposed more. Like you said, you have great cooking and people try it and you're like, oh, it's vegan. But I don't know, because there's policy and then there's also like frustrations with doctors. I know, I'm sure you've gone down that. I've been iron deficient. My whole family has. That's hereditary. It's not because I'm vegan. But my doctor literally said, go eat a hamburger. And that was her solution. That was her solution to getting my iron up. So there's these like frustrating points when you're getting kind of someone like a doctor that you're listening to and you're going to get help from. Mm-hmm. I would love to see more knowledge-based solutions as well, even in personal training and the dietetics courses, like really focusing on more plant-based education and exposure. Races too, sorry, I'll this is my last thing. I also noticed in the last like 2 to 3 years, races have now been offering vegan or vegetarian meals like for the after race, which is really nice to see. We did a cycling race and we had a full vegan like before the race, after the race. It was great. They had lots of vegan options. And I think races are starting to ask that on the survey questions. So if you're participating in an event, I think it's really important that you answer those questions about the event, because they're looking at it from a sustainability, but also on that line as well. So having races and sporting events offer vegan options, I think. So I'd love to see this shift go from not it being an option to that's just what it is.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, actually, there's some points in there I wouldn't have thought of. The vegan race options is one of them. We had Saskia on the podcast recently, who's a coach in Victoria, who runs a triathlon, an annual event that is 100% vegan and so little waste that for the whole triathlon, they have one garbage bag. It's amazing. So making that kind of thing the default versus the exception, I think would be incredible. Timm, do you have any thoughts on random things you want to see happen in the next 5 to 10 years?
I'd love to see a shift in how subsidies are being distributed. It's not just about food, but it's that whole renewable energies and all these different, more environmental friendly sort of sectors where we know that subsidies are basically keeping the prices up, or the subsidies being allocated to the wrong industries are basically keeping the prices up for renewable energies and plant-based foods. And that takes a shift in policies, some courage, perhaps some bravery in government officials to really advocate for the right things and not kind of surrender to big lobbyism. I mean, that's just such a big component. It's the individual choices, but basically people continue to be fooled into believing they don't have a big leverage on driving change, and the things which are kind of suggested to people where they can make an impact, they're not really impactful. To give an example, I always cite the recycling, where people are sort of made believe that recycling is such a big thing, and I'm not suggesting it's not important, but it's by no means the most important lever we have as individuals. In my opinion, that's very much what we eat, along with where we put our money. But what we eat is arguably the single easiest life choice that benefits the planet, benefits the health system in so many ways, right? It's such a multi-benefit solution being plant-based, but you just don't hear this being advertised as a very powerful solution towards addressing social environmental problems. And again, that comes down to lobbyism, and it's actually very simple solutions, but it's powerful actors that are preventing those very important steps to be taken. So in a nutshell, I'd love to see some leaders to become real leaders and advocate for the right things to fix the problems we have. That's what I'd love to see, because otherwise it's just very, very hard, because big organizations have a lot of money. It's so easy to produce science that's maybe just pseudoscience, which is not really based on true facts. At scale, you're running against the wall unless you can get governments to introduce policies that really benefit people. The second one, maybe just briefly, because I've been living at a university for 20 years, basically, that's been my my home turf across different continents, always been in academia. I'm always appalled by how little leadership there is in academic institutions, where you think if you don't get academia, universities as the organizations that generate the knowledge that we all thrive on or not. There's so little leadership, and it's nice to see that out here in Europe and in the UK and Germany, there's a lot of universities going plant-based. I have not seen that in Canada yet or North America. I'd love to see much more leadership in universities to really not just produce knowledge, but basically to live by the knowledge they produce across the globe, all institutions, because I feel that's a very strong, powerful, sort of network of organizations to advocate for the right things, plant-based, nature-based solutions, all these very powerful and interesting, solutions that we have. So we're not always in that same kind of mind shift. There's a lot of very great thinkers advocating, introducing very interesting concepts about how we could live our lives differently, and branching off a little bit. But I think I'd love to see academic institutions take on some real leadership.
Yeah, you have an excellent point. What you were saying about subsidies reminded me of what I read in George Monbiot's book. So I just looked it up. The joy of reading on Kindle is that I can really easily find a little chunk that I'm looking for. So just as an example, for our listeners here, Monbiot is talking about sheep farming as an example, and he's based in the UK. And so he says, this farming has not been economically viable for many years. Across Wales, where most of the land is used for sheep grazing, the average farm income from agriculture hovers around £0 a year. Almost all the money farmers receive comes from public subsidies. And then, of course, it goes on to talk about the ecological disasters that this is causing, et cetera. But it's just one example of many that it's not economically viable, and that these subsidies exist and could be used differently, potentially. So I think that's a really interesting point. I think the first thought in all of our minds when we think about what do we want to happen in the next 5 years is, well, obviously everyone should go vegan. But it's a lot more nuanced. We want systemic change as well as individual change. And I think the subsidy part is an important piece of that systemic change. So to wrap up here, Leanna, what can we plug? We've got your website. We'll have it our show notes, but for our listeners, it's wingsofsurvival.com. We have your amazing chocolate company, 7 Summit Snacks. Are those the main things? What else we got?
Big Mountain Foods, of course. Anything else, Tim?
As I said earlier, we love to chat to people, especially kind of companies who are maybe introducing some very interesting, novel, plant-based products, something we could try on our different expeditions that we do on our different feeds. So we'd just in general love to chat and see if there's ways to amplify the story. As I said, we're just catalysts for a bigger picture movement. It's not necessarily about us. So if anyone likes the concept of what we're doing, we work with film production companies. I don't know if that's been mentioned already. So there's a lot of media interest. The sort of professional film producers on board. So a lot of scope to kind of explore ways to team up.
Amazing. Well, I'm so glad I could meet you two. Thank you, Tim and Leanna, so much for coming on the show. Also, extra shout out to Francis for connecting us. And I cannot wait to follow you on this amazing adventure next year. As usual, of course, we will have links at our show notes. But if folks are listening right now, wingsofsurvival.com is the main hub of all this absolutely insane and impressive plant-powered athletic feats. So Leanna and Tim, thank you so much for coming on the show. Great to speak with you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us.
Thank you so much.
Leanna and Tim, thank you again for speaking with me on the show. Access our show notes at nobullshitvegan.com/219 to connect with Leanna and Tim. And thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening to the No Bullshit Vegan podcast at nobullshitvegan.com.